the Blackjack. And yes, that's the actual name. I didn't just make it up because it sounds cool. Usually black and around a quart in size, and typically held things like beer, ale, sometimes even wine. And here's what hooked me onto the project. Now, while leather is a material that's been used for millennia, leather that holds liquid, it involves a whole different process that most people don't know about. So today, we're gonna go through the history, we're gonna find out why these things were everywhere, and most importantly, we're gonna make one of these ourselves. Or at least try to. The trying part is the most historically accurate part of this whole video. So let's set the scene. England, roughly 1550. You're poor, but you're thirsty, and you need a drink, but most of the drinking options are expensive. Now, wood is decent, but it cracks, and ceramic is great, but it chips, and it's heavier than you'd think while you're on the move. But leather though, leather's everywhere. You are in a society that's completely run by livestock. There's a tanner in every town, every region has a supply of hides, and a skilled leather worker, or bottelier, which is more or less where we get the word bottler, who could turn a piece of flat tanned hide into a watertight vessel. Now, the source I keep coming back to for a lot of this stuff is John Waters' Leather and the Warrior, published in 1981. And he starts to look at leather as more of a technology than just a material, which, when you put it in perspective like that, starts to make a lot more sense when you're building an object like this. The leather has to be very particular, and in that I mean I used 11-ounce leather, which is a very thick leather, and on top of that it has to be vegetable tan, which basically means it needs to be made with oak bark, which has natural tannins in it, and that's because it reacts with water a very particular way. When you wet it and then dry it, it holds its shape, and when you push it to the extreme and almost boil it and then dry it again, also known as boiled leather, also known as cuir bouilli, it becomes extremely durable and hard, and it's exactly what you need for a blackjack. So at first I'm going to lay this block, and this block is basically going to be the mold for our leather. So now that I've laid down a cylindrical piece of wood that is mostly mug shaped, I have a leather form, a round piece of wood for the metal forming, and a smaller piece of wood for the bottom forming. We're gonna wrap it around the first time when we mold it with just water, and then we'll mold it around the second time when we boil it. Now for the iron band, I just have a piece of flat bar. I just smoothed it into a quick little circle and pounded it onto the leather. This created that leather form, that bottom piece that will snugly fit into the bottom, that I can stitch together all the way through so that it becomes watertight. We basically want to start out by soaking our leather forms in water. This will ensure that once it dries, it holds its basic shape. So after about a day of drying, we can take it out of the forms and trim it to size. Try to go over, not under, because you can always take material away. We trace out the handle and cut it out, trying to trim the corners and create a symmetrical hole. And from there we can trace our stitch lines, which are going to help us with the awl. And once we get a good layout, we can punch through the leather and try to keep the holes as aligned as possible. And then the whole thing is stitched together, not with modern thread, but with wax linen. And to be completely clear here, my stitching isn't perfect. I have misaligned holes, it's all over the place. This thing is a whole lot more difficult than you'd think to stitch together, but I want to be completely transparent with you. I'm not perfect. This never turns out perfect, and that's exactly why it's historically accurate. It doesn't need to be perfect to be functional. And the stitching technique I'm using here is called a saddle stitch. It's basically 2 needles, 1 long piece of thread, and it goes back and forth through the holes, one at a time all the way through. And what this does is creates an interlocking system of stitches that holds together really tight, unlike a machine stitch that is a lot more like a chain than locking threads. We're going to start the second process by soaking the leather again to avoid temperature shock, and start by splitting that form from earlier. I used a froe, but you can use a saw or axe if you wanted, and then I dropped it into the 180-degree water for about a minute. And then I rushed outside, I quickly pushed and hammered that form into place, and once this happens, as the leather cools and it dries, it should be much harder than it previously was, creating that boiled leather we're going for. We want to make sure to hammer the bottom of the form in as well to get that overall shape, and mine turned out a little bit wonky, but it still turned out good. Now, people who say, oh, they don't make things like they used to, are typically not always right. But in this circumstance, they absolutely are. And so now we have a shape, and it looks like a leather tankard, but if we poured anything in it right now, it'll start dripping through, the leather's unsealed, it'll start rotting in a week. I mean, it's just not ready yet. But this is where the little piece of technology comes in that makes it watertight. Pitch, or more specifically, a mixture of pitch and beeswax. And this pitch mixture is poured into the blackjack and swished all around the sides, enabling it to be watertight. And the pitch here seals it completely through. And I'll be honest, it has a little bit of a flavor, but it's not bad. And historical documents like to describe the ale drunk out of blackjacks as tarry, which sounds disgusting. But when you're in an age before refrigeration and before any kind of quality control with any kind of ale, it's good enough. It's ale. And now it's in your blackjack. And here's where it gets a little interesting. If you look up blackjacks in a museum or in a book or just their general description, it'll usually say that they were leather vessels with a crude primitive stopgap until proper materials became available. And that framing is just wrong, and it's rude to the people who made these and used these, because blackjacks weren't just used by people, they were used by the military. Military logistics in the Tudor and early Stuart period relied heavily on leather containers for water, for ale rations, for carrying gunpowder in some configurations. The blackjack in particular shows up in the quartermaster records because it's durable in a way that ceramic simply isn't. You can drop it, you can attach it to a horse, you can let it go without it simply shattering on the ground. John Waterer also documents this in his book, all the way late into the 1640s, the English Civil War, that these weren't just primitive hand-me-downs. These were engineered solutions. And then there's the name, blackjack. And typically we think of the black referring to the pitch inside or the tar that was covered on the outside. But the term jack, as referred to by the Museum of London, a jack was specifically described as a large drinking vessel as opposed to a small personal drinking vessel, which shows the fact that they were used in pubs and they were used commercially and they were used in bigger events. So it wasn't just something some dude made or the military's cup. It was behind every bar at your local inn. And here's the part I love and hate, because they didn't just disappear because someone came through and stole them all, or they all burned in a fire. They were replaced when glass became cheaper and more easily available. This was simple economics, as a Venetian glass blower could very much outperform a leather worker creating a blackjack. History is usually just money in disguise, most of the time. So here it is, 11-ounce leather, saddle stitched around, coated with pitch and beeswax, a 70-30 mixture. I found that was the best ratio for flexibility to rigidity. Exterior coated with lamp black and linseed oil, and then sealed with beeswax. The seams held, and most importantly, it holds liquid perfectly. I tested it for 30 minutes with water, held it above a bowl, not a single leak, because if anything, I am anxious and I wanted to make sure it worked. And when drinking from it, I'm not gonna lie, there's a little bit of flavor, but I'm not gonna say it's bad. If anything, it adds a little bit of personality and it's a little nutty. So what can we actually take away from all this? We learned that when treating leather a certain way, it can become a serious engineering material. And on top of that, it's not just a primitive placeholder. It's functional and it works well. We learned that the blackjack was all over England for over 200 years, from the military to the bars and inns to people's own homes. And most importantly, we learned that some things that can be labeled as crude or nasty, maybe even old-fashioned, they can be elegant, locally sourced, economically sensible solutions to everyday problems, which is kind of its own story about the world we currently live in. Now, this absolutely is not the last video we'll be making, and if you want to come along for that journey, please feel free to subscribe. Leave a comment down below. What else do you want to see? What do you want to see me make? What do you want to see me go over the history of? I love doing this. And if you made one of these or I did something wrong, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to learn more about it. I'm new to all this. I'm just trying to teach what I know and pass it on through. I'm continuing to learn just as you are. You comment, I learn from them. That's the deal. On top of that, I want to give a big shout out to Skill Cole. His video, which I watched tremendously to make this, was absolutely imperative to the different ways to make it. I made it almost the same way as him, and he did it much better. Please feel free to check him out. If you'd like links to all the stuff that I used to make this, check the description. Not affiliated, just so you have it. And on that note, I'll see you next time.